The Pre-Med Year, session number 361. Hello, and welcome to the Pre-Med Years, where we believe that collaboration, not competition, is key to your success. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Gray, and in this podcast, we share with you stories, encouragement, and information that you need to know to help guide you on your path to becoming a physician. Thank you for taking some time to join me today. I'm excited to have our guest on today, Will, who I connected with on Reddit. Now, Will posted about his journey and his multiple attempts at getting into medical school and his multiple rejections at getting into medical school, but finally was excited to post that he got in. And now with 3 acceptances, Will talks to me about his journey to medicine, why he thinks he wasn't successful to begin with, and what ultimately made him a successful applicant this time. Will, welcome to the Pre-Med Years. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
When did you first realize you wanted to be a doctor?
So I first realized pretty early in my college career, actually, which I know is a lot later than a lot of people. You know, there's some people who knew that they wanted to be doctors by the time they were 3. I wasn't one of those people, but what I did know was that I wanted to do something with the study of biology. I've always loved biology, study of plants, animals, people, all of it. So when I was in college, I started exploring, different ways to make that happen within my career. And so, I looked into research options. I looked into the PhD route. And I happened to be going to an undergrad that had a lot of pre-med students. And so some of them encouraged me to do a little bit of shadowing and just kind of look into the medical possibility, which wasn't really something I had considered before. And by the time I was finished with my first shadowing shift, I was hooked, and I knew that's what I had to do. What was it about the shadowing that had you hooked? First of all, I was shadowing this just amazing anesthesiologist in my hometown, and he was just the way that he interacted with patients. He had this manner about him. He was actually very soft spoken. And just a generally very friendly guy, not arrogant at all, but the way that he spoke to his patients, just radiated not confidence, but competence. Mm-hmm. And I just really enjoyed the way that he fostered that relationship. And then in addition to that, I was just really lucky on that first shift, and I saw some really amazing procedures as well. And that kind of dazzled me. So that helped as well.
What was it about biology that had you just like, I want to do something around biology?
So I've always been the sort of thinker. So for instance, to give you a little bit of context, my undergraduate degree was a double major in biology and music. So I've always kind of had this dual interest in, the technical, the objective, sciencey side of things. But then at the same time, I've always really enjoyed, art and creative writing and kind of the less exact, but more subjective, these more subjective ways of reasoning and ways of creating. And I've really found in biology the kind of melding of those two in a lot of ways. I've had, especially in some of my upper level biology classes in undergrad and my studies since then, where you kind of see biology as, still a hard science, but kind of the softest of the hard sciences is the way that I like to think about it.
Okay. Very interesting. What instrument do you play in music?
Tuba was my main instrument.
Tuba.
And then I did a fair amount of vocal work as well, a cappella groups, choir, all that jazz.
So after your shadowing and you're like, okay, this is kind of cool. This is what I want. Was there any sort of hesitation to go, well, I'm already this far into my college career. It's going to take too long, or my grades aren't good enough at this point, or I just don't know what to do. And so I should just do something different.
Well, I got to be honest with you. During my undergraduate career, that really wasn't the case. Because I was already on a Bachelor's of Science track for my biology degree, I didn't actually end up needing to add classes until later in my college career, after I had already made the decision to switch to pre-med. And even though I did go and I spoke to my undergraduate pre-med advisor and had people look at my applications, I really didn't understand that my GPA wasn't quite up to snuff until I applied and I didn't get in. And then that's when I started to realize, maybe I had messed up a little bit with my grades.
How did those conversations go with the advisor to begin with?
Well, so the advisor that I spoke with in undergraduate, I think from what I've seen online is actually fairly typical, was an older retired doctor who, he really knew the medical field really well. And I honestly do believe that he knew what would make a good doctor as well. But in terms of some of the finer realities of what is now, I think, a pretty rapidly changing and more competitive field for applying to MD and DO programs, I don't think that he was quite as familiar with the up-to-date requirements that a successful applicant needs. So honestly, what really happened was I spoke to him about at the end of my first cycle, in that first failed cycle, in which I didn't get a single interview. And what he said to me was essentially, I don't know why you didn't get in, just apply again, do the exact same thing again. Which
Einstein's definition of insanity.
Exactly. Looking back, I can pretty clearly see that, but, I followed his advice, and the same thing happened the second time around as well. So it wasn't really until the end of that second application cycle that I started having those hard conversations. I reached out to a few, not associated with my own undergraduate university, but I did reach out to the father of a childhood friend who happened to be a professor at a local university close to my hometown. And he mentors many pre-med students at his own university, and was graciously willing to take on my case as well. And he was the one who first started to say, well, I had to tell me that I had some pretty significant hurdles that I had to overcome, and I had some gaps that I needed to fill if I actually wanted to see any success.
Yeah. So let's talk about those. What do you think was the biggest thing that led to, obviously applying and not getting any interviews is a huge blow. So what do you think was the biggest thing that kept you from getting any interviews at that point?
Well, I think that the big thing, I can't point to the weakest part of my application even now is likely is my GPA. My science GPA is just under a 3.4, and my cumulative GPA is just under a 3.6.
Okay.
But as this advisor has told me, and is clearly true, that in and of itself isn't necessarily lethal.
Nope.
To an application. My issue the first couple of times around was just I had that, and then I didn't really have anything real interesting about me. Is I was kind of the typical pre-med, except that my GPA was a little bit lower. So really, I think I lacked any what you might call like a wow factor, an X factor, anything interesting.
Okay. So from your first application to your third kind of jumping to the end, that you finally got an acceptance, did you not take any more classes to improve your GPA at all?
So I did. I ended up. So the first thing I did after graduating was do a year in AmeriCorps. And when you finish AmeriCorps, you get a small education stipend.
Mhm.
The main thing that was preventing me from taking a whole bunch of classes to improve my GPA was financials. And I'm sure that that's something that resonates with a lot of your listeners.
Yeah.
But I did use that education stipend to take one class, and it was only one class that I could afford to take at a local state university. And I did that. I had multiple reasons for deciding to do that. One was to, marginally bump up my GPA, but also just to make sure that I still knew how to, study and take tests and be in class.
Yeah, definitely. It's important. Prove to medical schools that you still like being a student.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk about this X factor, because it's interesting. So it's something that that I typically, that sort of language typically try to shy away from, right? Even I was at a conference this weekend, and I'm like, short of curing cancer, there's nothing that's going to be on your application that's going to stand out so much that they're like, wow, look at that. So what do you think between your first application to last was really the X factor for you?
Well, it's to me, I think that I think that sure, I do understand where you're coming from, but I think that in my experiences, what I did after college was I did a year in AmeriCorps, and then I did 2 years, and I'm currently completing my third year in the Peace Corps as well.
Wow.
And so, even though I don't, that's obviously not curing cancer or anything like that, it is, I think, unusual. So I do think that those experiences, and also the ability to reflect on those experiences and talk about them, at least gave me something that made me stand out a little bit in comparison to maybe other applicants who are applying, and maybe who are applying with higher stats than my own.
What, in terms of what you're doing, for someone who doesn't know AmeriCorps, doesn't know the Peace Corps, what are you doing day in and day out as part of your duties there?
Well, they're two very different organizations. In the Peace Corps, in AmeriCorps, most of what AmeriCorps is essentially you're working for a nonprofit, and but you're being paid through this organization. So you are a free volunteer through. You are a free volunteer for your nonprofit, but you're paid through the U.S. government through this AmeriCorps program. And it's a well-known program, but it's quite varied. The Peace Corps is, I think that the name tends to kind of mix people up a little bit because they sound very similar, but they're really not. The Peace Corps is the general idea is that they take individuals, American individuals with either 5 years professional experience or an undergraduate degree, and they train them for 3 months in language and culture and all this stuff in a country. The Peace Corps operates in over 100 countries around the world, but in one of those countries, you train for 3 months, and then you go and you enter into a community, and for 2 years, you live and work in that community as similarly as the host country nationals live and work. So for me, my neighbors were sustenance farmers, and they lived in basically concrete boxes. So that's basically what I did as well. Now, as an extendee, my situation is a little bit different. I'm working I'm working with an NGO, and so I live a little bit more like an expat, a little bit less like a local. but there's still a significant amount of cultural understanding, cultural competence that I need to exhibit on a day-to-day basis to be successful in my position.
So a lot of students listening to this may go, well, okay, so you did AmeriCorps, you did Peace Corps. That has nothing to do with medicine. How does that help an application?
Well, I would disagree. Of course, I wasn't. Neither of these things included any clinical experience, and so on that level, yes, it has nothing to do with medicine. But I think that a lot of things, and from a lot of the literature that I've seen, a lot of the people at medical schools that I've spoken to, I think that they think medicine is a lot more than just being able to practice and knowing the science. Mm-hmm. It's also the ability, it's the impact that a care provider may have on their community. It's the ability to connect with people, connect with patients, and maybe reach out to underserved populations around the institution for which you're working. And the skills, a lot of the soft skills, a lot of the community outreach skills that I've learned and sharpened during those experiences, I think are likely to translate over, to translate over into a successful field in medicine. Is it going to necessarily? Am I going to be able to do better on the step 1 or step 2 exams because I was in AmeriCorps or Peace Corps? Probably not. But I do believe that those experiences and those opportunities for personal growth are something that I hope to put to good use when practicing and interacting in communities.
Yeah, 1,000%. That'll help. Were you getting any sort of clinical experience or any sort of shadowing during that time?
So during the time, during the period, no. But I did have a sort of a gap between finishing AmeriCorps and starting Peace Corps. And in that gap, I was certified I got my CNA license, and I worked in a skilled nursing facility as a CNA.
Nice.
For about 4 months. So that's where I got my clinical experience.
Okay, good. That's awesome. So between the first application, you obviously had to take the MCAT for that application, to the third application. I'm assuming your MCAT expired. What was that like to know that you had to undertake that again?
It did. It wasn't my favorite thing in the world, but I knew that it was something that I would have to do. And honestly, in comparison to everything else that I've been through, the MCAT didn't seem like as big of a deal. I did study for the MCAT while in the Peace Corps, while in the village. So I wasn't able to utilize. Well, I didn't have electricity or running water. So I wasn't able to use as many online tests, or I wish I could have used Anki, but I didn't.
Yeah.
What I did have was quite a bit of time, or a very flexible schedule. So I did, and the Princeton Review study book, just the typical MCAT study book that I think a lot of people use. So I studied, and I did, I did the best that I could. And I did end up actually having to fly out of the country into another country to be able to take it.
Wow.
As well. So that added a little, they canceled my flight actually. So I had to take a second flight. But it all worked out, and I ended up with a score that was actually very close to my initial score, the score that I took, that I got when I took the first time. Of course, I took the first test on the 45 scale.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So your score went up a bunch.
It did. Yeah, it did. Right. Percentile wise, it stayed about the same, and I was happy with that.
Yeah. Having been out of that classwork for a while and studying in that environment, that's pretty great. And your MCAT, you don't think was a barrier to entry in the initial applications?
I don't think so. Well, I'm happy to tell you my first MCAT was a 32.
Okay. Great score. So for someone listening, a 32 is roughly like a 515-ish now?
No, it's more like a 511, 512. From what I've seen. It was 89th percentile, maybe not, maybe higher. You know better than I do, I guess.
Okay.
And then my score this past time around was a 510.
Okay.
So, you know, not quite as high, but still kind of in the same general ballpark.
Yeah, that's great. Especially again, given that gap and given that study. So I just Googled it real quick while we're chatting. So 513-ish for a 32. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So definitely the MCAT not holding you back. So GPA potentially, and you mentioned the way that you talked about your CNA license and working in that SNF. That was your clinical experience. Do you think you were lacking clinical experience in those initial applications as well?
Yes, absolutely. I had for those first two application cycles, I did have. So I was a health officer at a camp.
Okay.
During that period of time, and I was under the impression, and I had also been told this by that initial pre-med advisor as well, that would count as clinical experience. Having looked at some other sources, it's pretty clear that did not count as clinical experience. So aside from shadowing, I really didn't have anything going for me in that department.
Yeah. What were you doing as a health officer? What did that look like?
Yeah. So I worked at a summer camp for kind of children from low-income families, close to my hometown as well. It was actually an experience very near and dear to my heart. I really, really enjoyed it. I made a lot of really good friends. But for 2 years, I was essentially what you might consider to be a more typical like summer camp nurse. I was in charge of making sure that the kids got their medications in during meals whenever they needed to get them. I was in charge with a very, very basic first aid. But I wasn't working under any actual healthcare professional or anything like that. And I was not in what you would call a traditional clinical setting. So that's why it was a great experience, but it really wasn't a clinical experience.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I would definitely call that clinical experience, and put it, I would have a student listed as clinical experience, but it's something definitely that a school's going to want to see something a little bit more traditional as well, just to make sure that you have that understanding and exposure as well. So,
yeah, absolutely. So it became a lot stronger once I had the CNA experience to supplement it, I think.
Definitely. Awesome. Was there anything, once you started working as a CNA, right, you have that experience, you're like, wow, like this is real clinical experience, right? Yeah, I've shadowed and I've done the health officer thing, but being on this other side, right, working as a CNA, were you exposed to anything that kind of opened your eyes a little bit more?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's funny, in more than one of my interviews, I've had people say, wow, that's a CNA. Wow, that's a really hard job. I can't imagine the people that do that. I really didn't have that experience. I loved being a CNA. And the reason I liked it so much was, well, first of all, it was able to form these really close relationships with my residents. This was the facility I was working in was a nursing home. I was working with mostly late stage dementia and Alzheimer's residents, and there were absolutely uncomfortable situations, unpleasant situations with combative residents, and things like that. But those were so much overshadowed by just getting to know the residents, doing what I was able to do to make them feel safe and make them feel at home, and then also working with a staff. The team that I worked with, the nurses and the other aides that I was working with, were just so compassionate and caring. And that's, just being able to work, having that work environment where you're surrounded by all of these people who really genuinely just want the best possible for the people that they're caring for. It was just it was an eye-opening experience, but just really in only the most positive ways.
Yeah. Good. So why you apply once, no interviews.
Mhm.
You apply again, no interviews. Why keep going?
It's what I knew I had to do. Um, I so I applied after the second time. I have to say it was the the tail end of my second application cycle. Getting into February, March, where it was clear that I wasn't going to see too much success. It was very difficult, and there were times that I absolutely wanted to give up. But looking forward, I just couldn't see myself. I really honestly couldn't see myself doing anything else. I think that there are a couple of factors that really helped me keep going. First and foremost was finding a couple of really, really good advisors. I think that was the most important thing because they were able to look objectively at my application and say, all right, this is where you went wrong. This is what needs to be fixed. But at the same time, hearing them say, no, this is still possible. You can do this. You just have to follow these steps. And I followed them, and I've seen success. Additionally, I actually, from the same Reddit post that first got us connected, I had somebody email me in a very similar situation, saying, they're on their second application cycle. They haven't seen any success, and they're really starting to feel hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
And my response to them was, in addition to finding good advisors, focusing on next steps, was to find something just in the day-to-day, something that you can legitimately look forward to doing in and of itself. For me, that was applying to the Peace Corps. Getting in, doing all this preparation and looking forward to this adventure that I knew I would be going on. But and that, admittedly, I did know that the Peace Corps would help my application process along. But I think I also did it just because it was something that I really wanted to do, and I knew that it was something that I would enjoy.
Yeah.
So that's something that's really helped me. That really has helped me keep going and through what's been a very, very long process for me.
I think a lot of students, they start to get to that point where they're trying everything they can do to improve their application and trying to figure out how to not game the system, but those words come to mind, right? How to figure out how to check just the right boxes to get into medical school. And you lose that passion, you lose that drive, because you're like, I'm just doing all this stuff because I think I have to do it. And so you're lucky that you found this thing that kind of added to your application, but it also was something you were passionate about doing. So that's great.
Yeah, it really was. And I also think that, these boxes are there to be checked, not just for the sake of them being checked. They're from admissions perspectives, these should be formative and growing experiences. And so, clinical experiences, volunteering experiences, these things, I think that they really should be, of course they can be hard, but I think that they should be fulfilling, and hopefully they should be the sort of thing that that applicants can, like myself, can learn to enjoy, and, just on their own merit.
Yeah. What was it like to get that first interview invite?
It was, I had to pull over. I was driving. I was actually driving in my grandpa's truck that he just passed away earlier this winter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. And so I was driving along in his truck, and I really felt his spirit as I got that call from an unknown number. And so I pulled over, and I was just barely able to make it to the end of the call before I burst into tears.
That's awesome.
So, yeah,
I think a lot of AdComs understand, like, it's okay if the student bursts into tears right now. This is something that, especially for you've been waiting a long time for.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just for the interview invite. That wasn't even for the acceptance.
No, that was for the acceptance.
That was the acceptance. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the interview day like for you?
Well, I've actually had a number of, I've had 3 acceptances at this point.
Amazing.
So I think that, they were all very different, actually, because one was all MMI, one was all traditional interview, and then one was half and half. But I think that for all of these the interview days that I've been on so far, really at that point, they weren't really stressful for me, and I was a little bit surprised by that. I expected to feel like it was this high pressure situation, but at that point, by the time that I was really stepping into the medical school, and I had my suit on, and I had already done my research on the school and knew my own application. I was just ready to show them, what I had been doing over the past 3 years, and to be comfortable with that and proud of that, and really, really, every one of, especially my traditional interviews, have all just felt like conversations.
That's all they want.
Yes, exactly. I think that's all they want. And even my conversations with my fellow interviewees have been just, friendly and getting to know each other. And I haven't really felt a cutthroat feeling or environment from hardly anybody. It's been just entirely thinking, hey, you could be my classmate next year.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to meet you, and it's good to get to know you.
Yeah. Great attitude for that. So, Will, 3 application cycles, 2 MCATs. I hate the plural form of that. 2 MCAT tests, a trip with the Peace Corps, a stint with AmeriCorps. Looking back on your journey, are you glad it's gone this way? Are you upset or mad or disappointed that you're not in 3rd or 4th year of medical school now? What are those emotions like?
Well, I actually do have, I have friends who have already graduated from medical school, and they graduated the same year as I did in undergrad. And there were certainly times during the first couple of years after I graduated where I was frustrated and I wish I was already in. But at this point, what failing to get into medical school has allowed me to do is, live in different cities. It's allowed me to travel. It's allowed me to learn a new language and get to know a new culture. And it's also really, after this experience, I have found a new passion and realized that I really want to work in global health as well. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that I don't know that I would have had the same passion had I gotten into medical school right off the bat. So I think that I'm happy that it did end up this way. In all honesty, because I think that the time that I've spent between graduation and the start of medical school will continue to profoundly impact the path of my career past 2024, when I'm projected to graduate, and past residency and all of that as well.
For the student listening to this who maybe is coming off of their first cycle and didn't get any interviews or any acceptances, or second cycle, and they're doubting their journey, what words of wisdom do you have for them?
First of all, I'm sorry. I've been in that situation before, and it is rough. It's tough. But if this is something that that you're meant to do and that you want to do, and you're certain that you're in it for all the right reasons, it's really just time to refocus yourself. Don't lose focus, and make sure that you choose a path forward which is going to let you both improve your application and grow as a person. Choose something that you think you're going to enjoy.
All right, there you have it. An amazing story of resilience and determination and hard work, and just going out and living his life, even with the frustration of not getting into medical school twice and finally being accepted that 3rd time. I know when I wasn't accepted that first time, it's a blow. It's like, wow, I guess I can't be a doctor, right? And when you are going through this process, pouring your heart and soul into these applications, you have this sensation of this is my identity. Getting into medical school is my identity. This is what I have to do. And not getting that love in return from the medical schools, it's like, oh, then maybe I need to do something else. And then doing it again and not getting that love back. That's hard. And obviously, this is what he is meant to do, right? He said, I couldn't see myself doing anything else, right? And that's a super cliche answer all by itself. But with his story, that's powerful. That is what it is. So I hope you took something from this episode, some motivation, some encouragement to know that if you apply, if you don't get any interviews, if you don't get any acceptances, there are still things that you can do on this journey to continue down this path to becoming a physician, to make yourself a better applicant, to make yourself a better person. And you apply again, you reflect on your journey, and hopefully one of those schools will want you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have a story that you think would be great here on the podcast, just shoot me an email, ryan@medicalschoolhq.net. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the Pre-Med Years.
This is MedEd Media.